Hey guys, tonight, dim the lights a little. Put the phone down somewhere nearby, face down if you want to feel productive about it. Get comfortable, because tonight we're drifting gently into one of history's longest, slowest, and most avoidable disasters. This is the story of how China's greatest empire looked at a steadily approaching problem, nodded politely, poured itself some tea, and said, "This is fine." We're talking about the Qing Dynasty. Big borders, huge population, confident vibes, and absolutely no interest in changing anything ever for any reason. So let's relax, let's breathe, and let's float slowly back to a time when emperors ruled the world from behind silk curtains, officials wrote reports no one read, and millions of people were quietly becoming addicted to a drug the government insisted was not a problem. Because of course they did. By the early 1700s, the Qing Dynasty was feeling pretty good about itself. Actually, more than pretty good. It was feeling cosmically smug. China was massive. Its population was enormous. Its bureaucracy was ancient, complex, and deeply convinced of its own brilliance. European visitors showed up, took one look around, and immediately realized two things. First, China had everything. Second, China did not care about them, and that second part really hurt. The Qing court viewed foreign traders the way a tired cat views a laser pointer. Vaguely annoying, not worth standing up for. European merchants were allowed to trade in exactly one place under very specific rules during very limited times. No wandering, no negotiating, no opinions, and definitely no equality. The emperor, after all, was the son of heaven. Everyone else was just not that. This worked fine for a while. Let's gently introduce the main character of our opening act, the Kangxi Emperor. He ruled for over 60 years, which in imperial terms is basically an eternity. Kangxi was smart, he was capable, he read books, he did math. He even tolerated Western science, which was bold for the time. He also presided over a system that assumed China was the center of the universe and always would be, which, historically speaking, is a risky assumption. Under Kangxi, China expanded, stabilized, and flourished. The economy grew, the population exploded, agriculture improved. Everything was going so well that nobody stopped to ask a very simple question: what happens if this stops working? They did not ask it, they did not whisper it, they did not think it. They just kept going. After Kangxi came Yongsheng, then Qianlong. Qianlong especially deserves a slow, sleepy pause, because Qianlong thought he was the final boss of Chinese history. He ruled for decades. He collected art. He wrote poetry. So much poetry, an exhausting amount of poetry. He also famously rejected British attempts at diplomacy, trade expansion, and basic mutual respect. When a British envoy suggested China might benefit from modern trade relations, Qianlong responded with the imperial equivalent of, "We already have everything, please leave." And that was that. Except it wasn't, because outside the palace walls, the world was changing rapidly, aggressively, and with ships, lots of ships. Now let's drift gently over to Britain. Britain had a problem, actually several problems, but the one relevant tonight was tea. The British loved tea. They loved it so much they were basically drinking it instead of water. Tea came from China. China wanted silver. Britain was bleeding silver at an alarming rate. This was not ideal. So Britain did what Britain often did in moments like this. It looked around for a workaround, and it found one opium, specifically opium grown in British-controlled India. It was cheap to produce, easy to transport, and highly addictive, which, from a strictly economic standpoint, was very convenient. At first, opium trickled into China quietly. Smugglers handled it. Officials looked the other way. After all, it wasn't technically legal, but it also wasn't technically being enforced, which is the most dangerous legal status anything can have. Opium smoking spread slowly, then faster, then everywhere. Merchants, soldiers, officials, farmers, even members of the bureaucracy tasked with stopping the opium trade were inconveniently addicted to opium. This did not help morale. The Qing government noticed. Eventually, reports trickled upward. Memorials were written, warnings were issued. They said things like, "The people are becoming weak. The silver is leaving the country. This might be bad." The court responded with confusion, denial, and mild annoyance. Because acknowledging the problem would mean admitting the system wasn't perfect. And that was simply unacceptable. So instead, the Qing did what large, proud empires often do. They blamed moral weakness. People, they said, should simply stop smoking opium because discipline and virtue, problemsolvet. Except, again, not really. By the late 1700s, opium addiction was widespread. The economy was wobbling. Silver was draining out of China faster than officials could explain it. The military, once feared, was underfunded and poorly trained. Soldiers were sometimes paid late, or not at all. Corruption flourished, because of course it did. Local officials skimmed taxes. Reports were falsified. Problems were hidden. And the emperor continued to receive glowing updates about how everything was fine, which is always comforting, right up until it isn't. Let's pause gently on the human side of this. Opium addiction wasn't dramatic in a cinematic way. It was slow, yet exhausting. People became lethargic. Families fell into debt. Work slowed. It wasn't chaos. It was decay, the most dangerous kind. And it spread so gradually that by the time it was undeniable, it was already everywhere. Eventually, the Qing court decided it had to do something. Enter Lin Cixu. Lin was serious, earnest, deeply concerned. He believed, genuinely, that opium was destroying the country. Which, spoiler alert, it was. He confiscated opium, destroyed it publicly, wrote stern letters to foreign traders. One of those letters was addressed directly to the British monarch. It politely asked why Britain was selling drugs in China while banning them at home. This was a reasonable question. It was also not well received. Britain responded with ships because that was its love language. And this is where our calm, drifting story begins to tip into inevitability. The Qing Navy was outdated. The weapons were old. Training was inconsistent. British ships, meanwhile, were modern, armed, and very confident. The result was not suspenseful. It was predictable and quietly devastating. The First Opium War unfolded less like a war and more like a demonstration of what happens when an empire refuses to update anything for 100 years. China lost badly, treaties were signed, ports were opened, Hong Kong was ceded. And opium? Opium kept flowing, because why would it stop now? And here's the thing, this wasn't the end. This wasn't even the middle. This was just the moment when the Qing Dynasty lost the illusion that it was untouchable. The slow unraveling had begun, but don't worry, we're not rushing. We're going to drift gently through rebellions, weak emperors, disastrous reforms, and a court that somehow kept choosing the worst possible option at every turn. So settle back in, adjust the pillow, because next we're floating forward into an empire desperately trying to patch holes with tradition, pride, and paperwork, and discovering very slowly that none of those things stop a flood. All right, let's gently continue our slow drift down the Qing Dynasty's increasingly wobbly path. If you're still cozy, maybe stretch a little, adjust the blanket so it doesn't creep off your lap. We are going to float now through a period of slow bureaucratic decline, where the court's decisions were less strategic genius and more will do exactly the opposite of what might help. After Lin Zexu's moral crusade and the British demonstrating how very much China wasn't ready for modern naval combat, the Qing Dynasty faced a problem. A big, slow, slightly embarrassing problem. The empire was starting to feel fragile. Not the dramatic, oh no, the sky is falling kind. More like the quiet, irritating kind where your favorite chair wobbles every time you sit down and you hope it won't collapse entirely before you finish reading. And yet, within the Forbidden City, life was luxurious, slow, and comfortable. Officials continued writing reports that no one checked. The emperor continued composing poetry. Tea was served on time. Silk robes remained impeccable, which is historically a pattern you'll notice often. Empires wobble quietly while the elite sip tea because it's impossible to feel urgency while wrapped in embroidered silk. Now, let's drift gently into some human stories. Opium didn't just wreck economies, it wrecked lives. Quietly, families saw fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands fade into lethargy. Debt piled up, small businesses collapsed. The countryside, already strained by overpopulation, struggled to feed itself. Meanwhile, in cities like Canton, the scene was surreal. Merchants smoked opium lounges into late hours. Officials sometimes joined them after a long day of pretending to inspect the docks. Children watched quietly, and the empire's bureaucratic machinery creaked along, generating reports that basically said, everything is fine, honestly. Which, if you've ever worked in an office where no one wants to admit problems, you recognize immediately. By the 1832, the Qing government realized it couldn't ignore the problem anymore. They tried some reforms, which mostly involved writing very stern letters, seizing small amounts of opium, and occasionally threatening traders. This is a theme that will repeat itself often. The Qing dynasty loved paperwork more than results. It's almost soothing, in a way, to think that no matter how catastrophic the problem, you could always hide behind an official memo. Except, again, it didn't work. The British, smug and profit-driven, kept pushing. Opium shipments increased. Silver kept flowing out of the country. And the government's warnings, ignored or circumvented. Lin Zexu's moral approach was noble. But Britain's approach was simpler. More ships, more opium, more money. And the Qing Empire? Well, it had no better idea than paperwork and virtue signaling. Meanwhile, life inside the court remained predictably dramatic. Emperors grew older. They wrote poetry about the fleeting nature of life and the importance of virtue. Consorts competed quietly for influence. Officials jockeyed for positions, often addicted to the very substance they were supposed to regulate. It's worth noting that Qing emperors were human. They worried about succession. They worried about rebellion. They worried about the reputation. And yet, somehow, they often failed to worry about things like foreign policy or effective trade regulation. This, in the long run, is a recurring theme in the story. A confident, cultured elite completely misjudging what actually matters. Let's pause to meet another key character, the Daoguang Emperor. He inherited the throne in 1820, a period when problems were already simmering. By then, opium addiction was widespread. Corruption was endemic. The economy was slowly hemorrhaging silver. Daoguang was not reckless. He was thoughtful, cautious, and genuinely concerned. But he also faced a dilemma. How do you fix a problem when everyone around you, including your officials, is part of it? His first instinct was moral authority. He issued bans. He appointed new officials. He wrote letters. And then he waited, which, historically speaking, is a fine strategy if the threat isn't steamrolling toward you like a freight train. The situation escalated quietly at first. Opium traders, seeing the Qing's hesitancy, smuggled more aggressively. Local enforcement became half-hearted. Corruption meant that bribes could buy protection, and ordinary citizens already addicted found themselves trapped in a cycle that had nothing to do with virtue. This is the kind of slow-motion tragedy that doesn't make for headlines. No explosions, no dramatic confrontations, just a nation quietly weakening under the weight of bad policy, human frailty, and a foreign power with no interest in subtlety. By the mid-1832s, the empire reached a tipping point. Daoguang appointed Lin Zexu, or rather, re-empowered him to take decisive action. Lin confiscated massive quantities of opium in Canton. He destroyed it publicly. The act was heroic, ceremonial, and let's be honest, inevitably going to provoke a response. The British did respond with military force, and this gently brings us to the First Opium War. The First Opium War wasn't dramatic in a cinematic sense. It was devastating in a slow, administrative way. China's forces were outdated. Ships were old. Cannons were obsolete. Soldiers were poorly paid and sometimes unpaid. The British had steam-powered ships, modern canons, experience in naval warfare. The result was not unexpected. It was quietly humiliating. Ports were captured. Coastal cities were threatened. China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanking in 1842. This treaty opened 5 ports to foreign trade, ceded Hong Kong to Britain, and imposed reparations, all of which might have been survivable if the underlying problem hadn't continued. Opium did not magically disappear. Addiction continued. Trade continued. Corruption continued. And the court, to its credit, continued its paperwork. Reports were filed. Warnings were sent. Officials nodded politely at each other over tea. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, China's population continued to grow. Famine, poverty, and unrest quietly built momentum. The seeds of future rebellion were planted not with dramatic fanfare, but with quiet neglect and stubborn adherence to tradition. Let's pause on the human side again. Imagine being an official tasked with enforcing the opium ban. The drug is everywhere. The merchants are defiant. Your superiors are mostly addicted themselves. What do? Most probably just smoked a little opium themselves, wrote a report saying everything was fine, and went home, which, in a slow-motion sense, perfectly encapsulates the dynasty's approach: denial, inertia, and a strong sense of personal comfort. The 1,840 seconds were a slow, rolling disaster. Foreign powers were emboldened. Internal instability grew. The economy continued to leak silver. Opium addiction quietly ravaged families. And yet, inside the Forbidden City, life went on. Poetry was composed. Silk robes were embroidered. Tea was served precisely at the right temperature. It's tempting to see this as tragic irony, but it's also soothing in a way. Some things never change, even when the empire is quietly crumbling. By the time the Second Opium War began in the 1850 seconds, China's problems were no longer slow moving. They were obvious, unavoidable, and deeply structural. Foreign powers demanded more ports, more trade, more concessions. China's military was even weaker than before. Internal rebellions, like the Taiping rebellion, added layers of complexity that the Qing court could barely comprehend. The result was a prolonged, exhausting period of humiliation and loss. Opium, the seemingly small problem decades earlier, had contributed to the empire's unraveling. It wasn't the only problem, but it was one of the quietest, most insidious catalysts. And so as we drift toward the middle of this story, we see a pattern. The Qing Dynasty was majestic, cultured, and confident. Its rulers wrote poetry, drank fine tea, and collected art. Its bureaucracy was sophisticated and detailed. And yet, slowly, quietly, opium and the empire's refusal to adapt was eroding everything. The moral here isn't dramatic. It's sleepy. It's subtle. It's a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks ignoring a small problem will make it go away. So settle deeper into your pillow. Adjust the blanket. Take a slow breath. Because next, we will float even further down the Qing Dynasty's gentle unraveling. Internal rebellions, incompetent reformers, and a population quietly suffering under centuries of neglect. All right, let's continue. If you're still cozy, maybe take a sip of warm tea, stretch just a little, and adjust your blanket so it stays comfortably in place. There's no rush, nothing urgent, just a quiet story unfolding. We're drifting further into the long, gradual fading of the Qing Dynasty, a dynasty that once felt permanent, stable, and immovable until time began to wear it down. By the 1850 seconds, the Qing Empire was already tired. Decades of economic strain, widespread opium use, and the steady loss of silver had taken their toll. Many in the ruling class seemed far more interested in tradition and refinement than in practical solutions, and the distance between officials and everyday people quietly grew wider. And as often happens during long periods of neglect, unrest began to surface. Not all at once, not loudly at first, but slowly, persistently, like cracks spreading across an old wall. Some movements grew far larger than anyone expected. The most well-known was the Taiping movement. It began with a man named Hong Xiuquan, who had struggled repeatedly with the imperial examination system. After a series of intense personal visions, he came to believe he had a unique spiritual role to play. With deep conviction, he set out to imagine an entirely new kind of society in southern China. His ideas resonated with people who felt overlooked, burdened, or worn down by years of unfair treatment. And that was a very large number of people. What followed was not a single dramatic moment, but a long, exhausting period of disruption, one that slowly drained energy, stability, and confidence from the empire. But remember, we're moving gently here. No shouting crowds, no clashing armies, just the quiet effects of prolonged struggle, communities thinning out, fields left unattended, a sense spreading slowly that something very old was beginning to loosen its grip on history. Fields were abandoned, family displaced, and the Qing bureaucracy predictably responded with paperwork, moralistic proclamations, and the occasional half-hearted military campaign. The emperor at the time, Qianlong, tried to respond. He appointed generals, issued edicts, and occasionally fled the capital when it got too stressful, which is understandable. No one likes chaos, especially when your wardrobe is embroidered and silk is involved. The Qing military fought back, sometimes effectively, sometimes not, mostly not, and the rebel movements themselves were surprisingly organized, deeply motivated, and skilled at taking advantage of every weakness in the imperial system, which, when observed slowly and from a distance, feels almost inevitable. Meanwhile, other regions of China were also slipping into unrest. The Nian movement, the Miao uprising, the Pantai conflict, each one smaller than the Taiping movement on its own, but together forming a steady, rolling pressure that the state could never quite relieve. The empire had become too vast, its population too large, and its bureaucracy too inflexible to react with speed or clarity. And yet, inside the Forbidden City, daily life appeared unchanged. Tea was poured, poems were written, silk robes were carefully embroidered. Everything seemed orderly, right up until it quietly wasn't. Let's drift gently to another layer of the problem: reform. Some officials understood that opium, foreign pressure, and internal unrest could not be resolved with elegant language alone. They proposed new military methods, modern equipment, and unfamiliar styles of training borrowed from abroad. But these efforts moved slowly, were often incomplete, and frequently undermined by rival officials or simple bureaucratic inertia. There's something almost soothing, in a sleepy way, about watching an empire attempt change while remaining trapped in its own habits. It becomes a pattern, predictable, repetitive, and easy to drift along beside. Meanwhile, opium continued its quiet damage. Addiction was not merely a moral concern, it weakened farming, slowed production, and reduced military effectiveness. Soldiers who depended on it became unreliable. Officials who used it grew careless or disengaged. Families affected by it slipped gradually into debt, poor health, and obscurity. Because this decline unfolded so slowly, it never arrived as a single shock. It simply accumulated over time. By the moment foreign powers applied even more pressure in the 1850 seconds and 1860 seconds, the empire's internal strain was impossible to hide. This brings us gently to the Second Opium War. Britain and France, observing the Qing court's ongoing struggles and unresolved trade tensions, pushed for expanded access, additional ports, and stronger legal protections for their citizens. The Qing response came in the form of documents, moral reasoning, and carefully worded edicts. The foreign response arrived by sea. Historically speaking, this outcome was difficult to avoid. The conflict that followed revealed just how unprepared the empire had become. Agreements were signed, more ports opened, the opium trade continued, and back at court, tea was still served at the proper hour. Silk robes remained immaculate. Poetry carried on. By now, the pattern is unmistakable. Pressure from outside, unrest within, economic strain, social stagnation, and a system moving too slowly to correct itself. And yet, the court continued to drift along, convinced that tradition alone could quietly hold everything together, which, in hindsight, feels like a gentle lesson in denial, or perhaps the perfect bedtime story for anyone who has ever postponed dealing with a small inconvenience until it slowly grew larger. As we move into the late 19th century, the Qing Empire resembled a grand ship gliding forward while slowly taking on water, doing so gracefully, confidently, and without much urgency. The structure creaked. The crew was distracted. The captain calmly assured everyone that nothing was out of the ordinary. And somehow, for a while, the ship continued to float. This was the era historians later described as the self-strengthening movement. Some officials attempted to modernize industry, reorganize institutions, and adopt useful technologies from abroad. But these efforts were uneven, underfunded, and often slowed by internal disagreements, meaning progress arrived gradually and inconsistently. Meanwhile, the population continued to expand, outside pressures steadily increased, and social habits quietly weakened the system from within. This is a good moment to rest gently on everyday life. Picture a rural household in the 1870s. A father struggling with personal habits, a mother carefully stretching limited resources, local administrators distant or inattentive, occasional disruptions passing through the region, and a central government far away, absorbed in ceremony, tradition, and carefully written correspondence. It is a quiet kind of hardship, the slow, ordinary strain that rarely draws attention but shapes, lives over long periods of time. And so, as we drift toward the final decades of the dynasty, we see an empire gradually worn down by accumulated strain, administrative fatigue, and persistent outside influence. The lesson here is soft and unhurried. Even a wealthy, cultured, and confident empire can slowly loosen if small issues are repeatedly postponed. Certain social habits were only one part of this picture, but they proved especially effective at weakening stability over time. So take a slow breath, adjust your pillow, and let your eyes rest for a moment if you like. Because next we'll drift through the final phase of decline, marked by unfavorable agreements, growing foreign involvement, and the quiet conclusion of the Qing Dynasty. Let's settle a little deeper now. Adjust your blanket one last time, maybe tuck your feet beneath it, and take a slow sip of tea or water, if you prefer. We're about to move gently through the closing years of the Qing era, the gradual unraveling of a system that once seemed permanent. By the late 19th century, China had entered a kind of drowsy turning point. Picture a vast ship with worn sails and a softly creaking frame, its captain calmly insisting all was well, while the crew quietly debates which maintenance issue to address first. That was the Qing Empire. Earlier conflicts with foreign powers had already revealed limits to imperial strength, yet the court remained confident in its cultural authority. It continued to rely on long-standing ideals, ritual order, and the comforting belief that its institutions were fundamentally sound. Meanwhile, population pressures and persistent external demands slowly pressed against the foundations beneath the silk-robed administrators. We now drift toward a series of international challenges and internal disturbances that unfolded over time. Each one, viewed on its own, might have seemed manageable. Together, they formed a steady accumulation of pressure that gently reshaped the empire's position in the world. Once again, at the human level, the pattern repeats. Some officials promoted reform, some units trained with updated equipment, a few workshops opened, rail lines cautiously expanded across the landscape. But many of these efforts were slowed by internal politics or incomplete oversight. In the background, everyday habits continued to influence productivity, readiness, and social cohesion. And all the while, emperors composed poetry. There is something serene and quietly ironic about this. By the 1892, China encountered a modernized neighboring power that had adapted more quickly to changing global conditions. The contrast revealed how uneven China's own adjustments had been. Administrative coordination lacked, preparation was inconsistent, and outcomes reflected those differences. Territorial concessions followed, additional ports opened, foreign influence increased. Inside the court, daily routines continued. Reports were drafted, tea was served on schedule, silk robes remained immaculate. History is gentle in its telling, but one can imagine the quiet awareness of those who sensed that something very old was slowly, calmly coming to an end. Then came the Boxer Rebellion at the turn of the century, a popular movement combined with anti-foreign sentiment and religious fervor. Its name evokes energy, but in reality, it was chaotic, slow, and tragically ineffective. Foreign powers responded collectively and decisively. The Qing court attempted to navigate the chaos with edicts, ceremonial gestures, and bureaucratic maneuvers. It didn't work. The Boxer Protocol of 1901 forced China to pay huge indemnities, allow foreign troops on Chinese soil, and accept foreign oversight. A humiliation, certainly, but also a quiet confirmation that the empire's inertia and addiction to tradition had consequences. Meanwhile, inside the Forbidden City, life persisted as always. Emperors still wrote poetry, officials still drank tea, silk robes remained pristine, and slowly, inevitably, the dynasty's ability to govern collapsed. By the early 20th century, the Qing were a government in name only. Local warlords held real power. Foreign powers controlled trade and territory. Popular unrest simmered everywhere, and the dynasty, centuries old, quietly ended in 1912. Think about the human side. Decades of slow decline. Families disrupted by rebellion. Communities weakened by addiction. Generations raised in uncertainty, poverty, and foreign encroachment. The Qing dynasty's fall wasn't sudden. It was gentle, quiet, and inexorable. A long, sleepy fade, like sunlight slowly dimming behind a clouded sky. Opium, rebellion, foreign pressure, internal corruption, and cultural rigidity all combined into a soft, persistent erosion. Not dramatic, not violent in cinematic terms, just inevitable. And so, as we drift toward the end of tonight's story, here is the quiet, somber truth. Even the greatest empire can unravel gently if small, persistent problems are ignored. Addiction, complacency, overconfidence, and resistance to adaptation are far more dangerous than battles because they work invisibly. And sometimes centuries of elegance, culture, and wealth can vanish, not with a bang, but with a slow sigh. So let your mind float with that image. The Forbidden City, silent, elegant, emptying as an empire slips away. Silk robes folded, poetry unfinished, tea gone cold. The Qing dynasty, once vast, confident, and culturally supreme, ends quietly. Not with fireworks, not with sword clashes, but with the slow, inevitable tide of history. Take a deep breath. Let your body sink into the mattress. Adjust your pillow one last time, because that is the story of how opium, bureaucracy, and human inertia gently, inexorably reshaped China's greatest empire. And now, drift slowly into sleep, carrying with you the soft echoes of history's quietest, most inevitable lessons. All right, settle even deeper into your blankets. Maybe stretch your legs, adjust your head just slightly, and take another slow breath. We're now drifting into the quieter, more personal side of the Qing dynasty's decline, small, gentle human stories that float beneath the grand narrative of rebellion, war, and opium. because empires are made of people, after all. And people, as you'll see tonight, are beautifully flawed, tragically stubborn, and occasionally addicted to substances they shouldn't be. Let's begin with the officials inside the Forbidden City. Many of them were brilliant on paper. They had degrees from the imperial exams. They could recite Confucius backwards and forwards. They wrote poetry so carefully measured that reading it feels like watching someone slowly pour water into a porcelain cup. But brilliance on paper did not always translate to effective governance. Some were addicted to opium. Some were more concerned with maintaining appearances than solving problems. Some simply refused to innovate. Imagine an official sitting in his study. A letter arrives, warning him about opium smuggling, rebellions, and foreign threats. He reads it carefully, underlines a few phrases in red ink, and writes a polite response that essentially says, "Thank you for your concerns. Tea is excellent today." Then he smokes a pipe, adjusts his silk robe, and drifts off for a nap. This was historically more common than dramatic heroism. Meanwhile, in villages and towns across the empire, life went on. Farmers woke up early, worked the fields, and returned home tired. But many had family members addicted to opium, which quietly sapped the household income. Children often went hungry. Debt quietly accumulated. Local officials might collect taxes on paper that didn't exist in reality. Slow despair is subtle. It creeps in like morning fog. It doesn't make headlines. It just accumulates. Now, let's drift gently to merchants and traders. Opium trade had become a quiet, pervasive industry. Merchants could make enormous sums of money. Some prospered, some were ruined. Many were addicted themselves. Trade was controlled partially by foreign powers and partially by corrupt local officials. Shipping routes were precarious. Bribes were mandatory, and legal enforcement largely performative. A merchant might spend his day inspecting opium barrels, recording silver payments, and sneaking a puff for personal relaxation. A quiet life of slow risk and slow reward. Perfectly calm until international tensions escalated, of course. Let's pause on another layer. Families of the elite. Consorts and concubines lived lives of luxury, influence, and boredom. They wrote poetry, attended ceremonies, and managed intricate court etiquette. Yet even inside the palace walls, nothing was entirely secure. Political intrigue was constant, alliances were subtle, shifting, and occasionally cruel. It's tempting to imagine life in the Forbidden City as glamorous, and it was silk, jewels, fine food, but it was also quietly stressful, endlessly meticulous, and emotionally exhausting. Some consorts, feeling trapped or ignored, turned to opium. Some conspired. Some silently waited for change that never came. It was a slow-motion drama, soft-spoken, and endlessly patient. Meanwhile, across the empire, opium addiction quietly shaped culture. Artists and poets sometimes explored the haze of opium in their work. Some intellectuals debated morality, governance, and foreign relations while slowly succumbing to the very vice they condemned. Opium dens became social centers, quiet places where ideas, gossip, and melancholy drifted freely. And the Qing bureaucracy, reports continued to arrive. Warnings were noted. Edicts were issued. Tea was served. Everything maintained the illusion of order, even as reality gently frayed at the edges. Let's gently meet a minor figure, a provincial governor. He oversaw a region suffering from both opium addiction and tax evasion. He tried reform. He issued bans. He reported to Beijing, and he failed repeatedly. Sometimes his failure was due to lack of authority, sometimes corruption, sometimes sheer exhaustion, sometimes quietly he himself was addicted. This is the human rhythm of the late Qing Empire. Attempt, fail, report, drink tea, smoke, nap, repeat. And in the countryside, life was slow and quiet. Rebellions didn't always arrive dramatically. They simmered, quietly disrupting harvests, spreading fear and unsettling lives. Families adapted, fled, or were quietly consumed by debt and instability. The people who lived through this period were not heroic in a cinematic sense. They were survivors of slow, incremental mismanagement. They experienced the gentle erosion of a once great empire, day by day, year by year. Meanwhile, foreign powers quietly encroached. After treaties following the Opium Wars and Boxer Rebellion, ports were open, foreign banks operated freely, and missionaries walked through villages. Some brought education and medicine, some brought economic exploitation. All of it subtly shifted the balance of power, reinforcing the quiet decline already set in motion by internal problems. So, if you're still following along, you can see the pattern. The Qing Dynasty's collapse was not cinematic. It was gentle, quiet, and persistent. Opium, rebellions, foreign pressure, corruption, bureaucratic inertia, generational complacency. All of these combined into a soft, slow-motion erosion of what had once been the world's greatest empire. And yet, even in decline, life carried on. Silk robes were embroidered, poetry was composed, tea was poured. People loved, argued, failed, and survived. Take a long breath. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort. Adjust the pillow again, because next, in part 6, we will drift through the final decade of the Qing Dynasty, the abdication, the last emperor, and the very gentle, quiet end of imperial China. We'll continue the story in the same calm, sleep-inducing style, weaving human lives, bureaucracy, and the subtle consequences of opium into the closing chapters of the empire. All right, let's settle fully into your blankets. Maybe take a slow sip of tea or water if you prefer, and let your body sink a little deeper. We're now drifting into the final chapter of the Qing Dynasty, a slow, soft decline that ends quietly, without fireworks or battle cries, just like most things in this story. By the early 20th century, the Qing Empire was a husk of its former self. Internally, it was overpopulated, financially strained, and addicted to opium in more ways than one. Externally, it faced foreign powers with modern armies, steamships, and a relentless determination to secure trade and territorial concessions. And yet, inside the Forbidden City, life continued with astonishing calm. Silk robes remained immaculate. Tea was served. Poetry, always poetry, filled the air. It was as if the court existed in a bubble of elegance, oblivious to the world slowly moving around it. Entered the last emperor, Puyi. He ascended the throne as a small boy in 1908. Imagine being a child in the Forbidden City, surrounded by silk, attendants, and courtiers, while simultaneously being told you are the ruler of the largest empire in the world. Pressure would unsettle anyone, and young Puyi was no exception. He did not truly rule. He was largely a symbol, a quiet figurehead in a system already stretched thin. Officials continued their routines. Foreign representatives requested agreements. Everyday challenges quietly tested the empire's capacity. Puyi's role was mostly ceremonial, a long, gentle pause in the rhythm of centuries-old administration. In 1911, change arrived slowly across the provinces. Local communities and leaders began reorganizing under new systems. Meanwhile, the court carried on, serving tea, writing formal notices, and maintaining tradition as best it could. The abdication of 1912 passed quietly. Puyi stepped down as a child, retaining only ceremonial recognition for a short while longer. The dynasty, centuries old, dissolved softly, like morning mist rising off a river. There were no grand confrontations, no dramatic finales, just a gradual fading. Life, however, continued. Former officials adapted, families adjusted to new administrations and laws, and society gradually settled into new routines. The young emperor, Puyi, moved into a life of study, curiosity, and eventually departure from the palace that had defined his earliest years. In other words, the human story continued quietly, as most human stories do, even after the structures that once shaped it had faded. The gentle moral here is that even the largest, most cultured empires can be affected by small, persistent issues over long periods. The Qing Dynasty was rich in culture, in poetry, in ceremonial precision, yet slow, accumulating challenges gradually reshaped the system more than any single event ever could. Sometimes, the largest changes in history are not loud or dramatic. They unfold softly, day by day, almost imperceptibly. People experience them in small increments, emperor, official, farmer, or merchant, without noticing the full scope until the end arrives. Take a slow breath. Let your body sink further into your pillow. Close your eyes if you wish. Imagine the forbidden city at night. Empty halls, folded robes, cooling teacups, unfinished poetry on delicate paper, and the young emperor asleep in a vast, quiet room. The empire itself fades gently into history, leaving behind only records, memories, and the subtle echo of a culture that endured far longer than its rulers. Let your eyelids rest. Let your mind drift slowly along the quiet rivers of history, tracing the soft, gradual changes that shaped lives across centuries. This is the story of how everyday routines, human choices, and long-standing institutions quietly reshaped the world's largest empire, one calm, sleepy chapter at a time. Take one last deep breath. Exhale slowly, drift gently into rest. Now, if you are still awake, tuck yourself in a little tighter, pull your blanket over your shoulders, and let your thoughts float through the lives of people who moved quietly amid the Qing Dynasty's final years. History shows us that empires do not always end with clashes or proclamations. Often, they change through the small, everyday rhythms of life. Families, administrators, merchants, and farmers all experience these shifts softly, often without realizing the full transformation around them. Provincial officials, the middle management of the empire, worked diligently to maintain order. They were educated, thoughtful, and committed to appearances, spending days writing reports, inspecting minor projects, and attending ceremonies that felt important. Yet the challenges they faced, social changes, economic pressures, and local issues, often moved faster than their authority allowed. Picture a man in a silk robe at a lacquered desk. A report arrives about trade irregularities. He sighs, writes a measured response, pours tea, rests, and waits for the next notice. This pattern repeated across many provinces. The bureaucracy functioned technically, but slowly, politely, and cautiously. Meanwhile, in villages, life continued as a quiet negotiation between daily survival and distant oversight. Families worked hard to manage their resources, children contributed where they could, and small obligations and debts quietly accumulated over time. The pace was gentle, persistent, and enduring, much like history itself. Community structures strained under pressure. Opium dens were common in towns, functioning both as social hubs and sources of income for small-time dealers. People smoked to forget, to relax, to survive. The empire's bans were mostly performative. They were reports on paper impossible to enforce across vast distances. And life went on. Merchants and traders experienced the era differently, but just as quietly, some thrived, moving opium, silk, or other commodities. Some fell into ruin, caught between corrupt officials, rebel disruptions, and shifting foreign policies. A typical day might involve inspecting a shipment, balancing ledgers, bribing an official, and carefully avoiding military patrols. At night, there might be a quiet celebration or a puff of opium to relax. It was a life of slow risk, soft rewards, and subtle stress. Even foreign traders had their routines, largely insulated from the chaos, but constantly aware of the delicate balance they maintained. Let's drift gently over to the families of the elite. Consorts, concubines, and the emperor's children lived in luxury, but their lives were emotionally complex. Intrigue, jealousy, and subtle competition filled the quiet corridors of the Forbidden City. Children were raised with education and etiquette, often unaware of the empire's wider troubles. Concubines wrote poetry, managed household staff, and occasionally engaged in minor political maneuvers, all in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Opium occasionally ended their lives too, as an escape from boredom or stress. It was not dramatic. It was quiet, and it subtly shaped decisions and relationships within the palace walls. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued navigating the slow crises outside the city. Village elders negotiated with rebel forces or local bandits. Small-scale skirmishes disrupted harvests and trade routes. Debt, illness, and addiction quietly reshaped communities. These were the soft, persistent forces that eroded the empire from below. Rebellion and foreign pressure were visible, yes, but it was the daily struggles, the quiet human consequences of opium, bureaucracy, and slow governance that made collapse inevitable. Take a gentle breath and imagine this. A farmer wakes up before sunrise. His son coughs from opium exposure. Fields are flooded from a delayed repair that local officials ignored. Debt collectors arrive. Neighbors whisper about rebellion nearby. And somewhere, far away in the Forbidden City, officials sip tea and note in reports that all is proceeding according to plan. The contrast is subtle, ironic, and quietly tragic. It's the kind of story that doesn't scream but settles gently into the mind. Even culture and education reflected this slow decline. Schools operated, Confucian classics were memorized, poetry competitions continued, and yet the lessons of adaptability, innovation, and practical governance were largely ignored. Tradition persistait, virtue persisted. Paperwork persisted, and the world outside continued to change, slowly but inexorably. So, as we drift further, notice the rhythm. Opium weakens, bureaucracy delays. Rebellions simmer, foreign powers press. Families struggle quietly. Officials sip tea and write reports. It's repetitive, slow, and gentle. And that repetition is the point. History in this period is not a thrilling story of heroes and battles. It's a soft, endless accumulation of small, avoidable errors. And for our purposes tonight, it's perfectly suited to drift you towards sleep. Take a long breath. Let your mind wander through villages, courts, and opium dens. Notice the quiet patterns. Feel the slow rhythm of daily life in an empire gradually losing control. And remember, even the most majestic civilizations are made of ordinary people navigating ordinary struggles. Sometimes that's the most fascinating part of history. All right, let's settle even deeper now. Close your eyes slightly if you like. Let the blankets wrap around you and feel yourself drifting slowly with the gentle currents of history. We are now approaching the Qing Dynasty's final act, the quiet, inexorable fading of power, prestige, and centuries of imperial rhythm. By the early 1910 seconds, the empire was a shadow of its former self. The bureaucracy remained in place, beautifully maintained on paper. Officials still wrote reports, sent memorials, and attended ceremonial events with unwavering dedication to protocol. But beneath the surface, the machinery was slow, ineffective, and hollowed out. Rebellion and unrest were constant. Foreign powers pressed insistently on trade, ports, and privileges. Opium, while no longer spreading as aggressively as in earlier decades, had left a trail of addiction and economic disruption that lingered quietly across provinces. The human cost was subtle, persistent, and often invisible in official records. Young Puyi, the last emperor, is central to this final chapter. He became emperor at the age of 2 in 1908, after the sudden passing of the previous ruler. Imagine being 2 years old, suddenly told you are the ruler of the world's largest empire and surrounded by a maze of attendants, courtiers, and advisors, all moving carefully around you. Puyi's role was largely ceremonial from the start. He held no real authority, no true power. The court continued its routines: tea at precise times, silk robes meticulously folded, poetry written on delicate paper, reports filed declaring that everything was proceeding smoothly. And yet, beyond the palace walls, life was quietly shifting. By 1911, reform and change swept across the provinces. Local communities and leaders began to establish new ways of organizing themselves. Meanwhile, inside the Forbidden City, life remained calm. Officials wrote reports suggesting that disruptions were contained, tea was poured, silk robes remained impeccable, and Puyi remained a child, largely unaware of the broader transformations unfolding outside. The abdication of 1912 passed almost without fanfare. Puyi left the throne as a child, and the dynasty officially ended. There were no dramatic battles, no heroic last stand, just a centuries-old system gradually settling into a quieter, more ordinary pattern. The palace emptied gently, attendants dispersed, officials found new roles or quietly lost influence, and the people continued their daily lives under new administrations and regulations. The conclusion was soft, slow, and inevitable. The human stories during these final years were quiet but meaningful. Puyi's caregivers and advisors worked to shield him from the uncertainties outside. Courtiers and officials navigated change through routine, ritual, and discretion. Families in villages adjusted to shifting local conditions and the gradual introduction of new regulations. Life continued, reshaped but ongoing. The familiar rhythm of empire ceremony, bureaucracy, culture gave way to something less structured, less predictable, but no less human. If we pause gently, a pattern becomes clear. Emperors composed poetry while systems adjusted, Officials filed reports while communities adapted, and ordinary people quietly managed the changes in their daily lives. Small, persistent choices accumulated over time, shaping the course of history in subtle ways. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your body sink into the mattress. Let your mind float along the corridors of the Forbidden City, across river valleys, into villages, and over provincial offices. Imagine the last emperor asleep in a vast room, unaware that he is the final figure in a long line of rulers. Imagine the bureaucracy, filing reports that may never be acted upon. Imagine the people outside, gently adjusting, generations adapting to gradual change. History, in this way, is not loud or dramatic. It is soft, persistent, and quietly inevitable. The Qing Dynasty, once the world's most powerful empire, ended not with a roar, but with a sigh. Silk robes folded, teacups cooling, poetry unfinished, paperwork archived, and life, as always, continued. Take one last slow breath. Exhale gently. Let your body sink. Let yourself drift into rest. This is the story of how everyday routines, human choices, and long-standing institutions quietly reshaped one of the greatest empires in history. Now, let's explore the softer, human side of the Qing era. Wrap yourself in blankets, adjust your pillow, and allow your thoughts to float through the quieter edges of history. Minor officials, merchants, and villagers experienced the empire's gradual changes firsthand, though their stories rarely appear in history books. Consider provincial officials, the middle managers of the empire. Educated and diligent on paper, committed to protocol, they were still human. Some struggled with fatigue or habits that slowed their work. Many faced the sheer scale of managing local issues with limited support. Picture one such official in a coastal province. A report arrives about trade irregularities, local complaints, and administrative challenges. He sighs, pours tea, pauses, writes a careful memo, and waits for the next update. Progress moves slowly. Meanwhile, in villages, ordinary people quietly adjust. Farmers navigate weather, taxes, and local challenges. Families work to manage resources, and everyday concerns quietly accumulate. Life continues in its gentle, persistent rhythm, shaping generations in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Rebellions disrupt life sporadically, but these are slow disruptions, creeping like fog over rice paddies and river valleys. Not cinematic battles, not dramatic last stands, just the daily grind of survival under an empire that can no longer fully protect or manage them. Opium plays a subtle but relentless role. Some smoke to escape reality. Some trade it to survive economically. Some are addicted without realizing the full consequences. Life continues quietly in the spaces between rebellions and treaties. Now let's drift to merchants. The opium trade, legally or illegally, provided opportunity and risk in equal measure. A merchant's typical day might involve inspecting shipments, balancing ledgers, bribing local officials, quietly smoking to endure stress. Some merchants prospered, some were ruined. Most existed somewhere in between, floating gently through the slow currents of empire, commerce, and addiction. Foreign traders, meanwhile, were largely insulated from the chaos. They navigated treaties, ports, and naval superiority with precision. But they, too, were part of the ecosystem quietly reshaping China. We can also pause on minor rebellions less famous than the Taiping or Boxer uprisings. These rebellions were small-scale, quiet, and exhausting for those involved. Villages fleeing, local officials struggling to maintain order, soldiers paid late or not at all. Each rebellion was a subtle reminder of the empire's limits, slowly eroding confidence in the Qing system. Life for those caught in these rebellions was quiet tragedy. Families displaced, fields abandoned, communities slowly fractured. The pattern is gentle, persistent, and easy to forget if one only focuses on battles and treaties. Let's float over to the human side of the opium trade. Opium dens weren't dramatic in the cinematic sense. They were slow, quiet places. People smoked, they talked, some slept, some dreamed. Debt, addiction, and small-scale criminality coexisted in the haze of smoke. Officials sometimes visited dens to investigate. Sometimes they themselves partook. Occasionally, moral lectures were delivered, though rarely enforced. The empire's inability to manage the trade, combined with human frailty, created subtle but devastating social consequences. Addiction sapped productivity. Corruption flourished. Trust in local authority quietly eroded. Meanwhile, in the Forbidden City, life remained predictable. Concubines wrote poetry, eunuchs maintained rituals, silk robes remained spotless. Tea was always at the correct temperature. The contrast between palace life and life in the provinces is striking. Inside, elegance and ritual persisted. Outside, slow decay and human suffering quietly accumulated. This is the subtle irony of the Qing Dynasty. Immense cultural and administrative sophistication paired with structural fragility and a persistent human toll. As we drift through the final decades, notice the pattern. Emperors composed poetry. Officials filed reports. Villages struggled quietly. Merchants calculated profit and risk. Opium remained a pervasive presence. Rebellion simmered and occasionally flared. Foreign powers pressed for concessions. Everything moves in soft, inexorable rhythm. No dramatic climaxes. No heroic last stands. Just slow, persistent historical inertia. Take a gentle breath. Let your mind float over provincial towns, opium dens, and palace corridors. Notice the quiet interactions, the small decisions, and the soft consequences that ripple across decades. History at this scale is not dramatic. It's subtle, it's persistent, and tonight it's perfect for drifting towards sleep. Nestle into your blankets fully, close your eyes slightly, and let your mind drift as we approach the final act of the Qing Dynasty. This is the soft, inexorable fading of an empire where centuries of ritual, ceremony, and human choices come to a quiet, inevitable conclusion. By the 1910 seconds, the empire was a shadow of its former self. The bureaucracy remained beautifully organized on paper, but hollowed out by inefficiency, distractions, and long-standing habits. Officials wrote reports, held ceremonies, and poured tea. Yet real authority had largely shifted to local administrators, foreign influence, and increasingly independent provinces. The world outside the palace no longer followed the rhythm of imperial ritual. It moved faster, quietly but persistently, while the Qing dynasty clung to silk robes, poetry, and tradition. Puyi, the last emperor, was central to these final years. He was still a child when he ascended the throne 2 years old, surrounded by attendants, concubines, and careful advisors. He was symbolic, powerless in practice, a child ruler in a slowly changing world. As political reforms and changes unfolded in 1911, the court continued with formalities. Reports noted unrest, shifts in local governance, and external pressures. Edicts were issued, tea was served, and the boy emperor continued his education, largely unaware that his title would soon hold little practical meaning. The abdication of 1912 was gentle, almost bureaucratic. There was no dramatic battle, no heroic last stand. The dynasty simply ended. Puyi left the throne as a ceremonial figure. Officials dispersed. Attendants and concubines adapted to a new, uncertain world. Life outside the palace continued. Families adjusted to new governments, new taxes, and changing conditions. Merchants continued their quiet calculations. Villagers rebuilt their lives in the aftermath of decades of change. History, in this sense, was soft, persistent, and subtle. Even after the empire ended, the lingering effects of long-standing administration and human inertia remained. Former officials adapted to new realities. Former imperial families adjusted to life without centuries of hierarchy. The empire's cultural legacy, ceremony, poetry, artistry remained, yet political authority had quietly vanished. Consider the human scale one last time. Farmers, merchants, minor officials, and ordinary families had lived through decades of slow transition. Some adapted, some faced challenges, some thrived, and the imperial court gone. Silk robes folded, teacups cooling, poetry unfinished. Life continued softly, with or without them. So, let's pause and drift over the final lessons. Empires change not only through dramatic events but through quiet, persistent challenges. Bureaucracy, human habits, and slow adaptation. Routine can preserve ritual while reality quietly moves on. Ordinary people experience the consequences of decisions or inaction over long periods. Even a child emperor can symbolize centuries of authority while wielding no real power, and life inexorably continues. Take a long, deep breath. Exhale slowly. Feel yourself sink into the mattress. Imagine the forbidden city at night. Empty corridors, silk robes folded, teacups left cooling. The last emperor asleep in a vast room, unaware that history has quietly moved forward. Beyond the palace walls, villages slowly rebuilding, merchants trading and surviving, families adapting to a world subtly but permanently changed. The Qing Dynasty is gone. Its influence persists culturally and historically, quietly in memory. But its political and imperial structure has ended not with drama, but with soft inevitability. And with that, we arrive at the gentle conclusion of our story. The empire that once stretched across vast lands, commanded immense wealth, and cultivated profound culture slowly, quietly, and inexorably faded into history. Silk robes folded, teacups empty, poetry unfinished. Life continued softly, as it always does. Take a final, deep breath. Exhale. Close your eyes fully and let yourself drift into sleep. This is the story of how long-standing routines, human choices, and subtle shifts quietly reshaped one of the greatest empires in the world, one soft, sleepy chapter at a time. Adjust your blanket, rest your head comfortably, and let your mind float slowly over the quieter, subtler parts of the Qing Empire. We are entering the lives of ordinary people, minor officials, and local families, the small cogs in the machinery of an empire quietly evolving. In the provinces, life was measured and meticulous. Officials continued to write reports, file memorials, and issue edicts. Farmers tilled the fields, often under threat of bandit raids, rebellion, or natural disaster. Merchants navigated taxes, fluctuating trade, and the constant presence of opium in daily life. All of this happened at a gentle, steady rhythm. No sudden explosions, no dramatic heroism, just soft, persistent patterns that shaped centuries. Consider a minor official in a small town. He wakes early, checks his ledgers, receives complaints from farmers about taxes and theft, writes a report to the provincial capital, Puyi, smokes a pipe, and repeats day after day, week after week. The problems he reports rarely get resolved. Local bandits continue, rebels quietly recruit, opium flows unchecked, and yet the routine persists. Silk robes may be replaced by simpler attire, but the ritual remains. Tea is poured, reports are written, human life continues in soft, persistent rhythm. Meanwhile, families quietly navigate survival. Children work in fields, markets, or small workshops. Parents struggle with addiction, debt, or illness. Local elders negotiate with rebel groups or foreign merchants to maintain some sense of security. It is a slow, gentle erosion of stability. Each small decision, paying a bribe, skipping a harvest, allowing a child to work, ripples outward. And the empire, distant and preoccupied with ceremony, cannot intervene effectively. Opium dens quietly shape social life. They are not dramatic. They are rooms filled with haze, where people smoke, talk, and sometimes sleep. Deals are made, gossip spreads, addiction is subtle but persistent. Merchants and minor officials might visit to unwind. Farmers might sell goods to support a habit, and everyone knows that the empire's bans are largely symbolic. The result, a society slowly reshaped by a quiet, persistent vice. Even in urban centers, life is subdued. Markets bustle quietly. Merchants count coins. Officials supervise trade with careful attention to paperwork. Foreign merchants quietly enforce treaties, expanding influence without dramatic confrontation. The contrast with the grandeur of the Forbidden City is stark. Silk robes, poetry, and ceremonial tea are distant ideals. Reality is pragmatic, messy, and quietly exhausting. As we drift further, notice the rhythm. Minor officials manage crises ineffectively. Farmers struggle quietly with rebellion, debt, and addiction. Merchants navigate risk and opportunity. Opium subtly undermines productivity and social cohesion. Life continues in a soft, inexorable rhythm. This is history, not in headlines, but in everyday life. Not in battles, but in bread, tea, and paperwork. Not in drama, but in persistence. Take a slow breath. Let your mind drift over villages, towns, markets, and provincial offices. Notice the quiet patterns, the small human decisions, and the cumulative effect of centuries of slow decline. History, in this sense, is gentle, repetitive, and hypnotic, perfect for drifting into sleep. All right, let's settle even deeper now. Adjust your pillow, pull the blanket snug, and let your mind drift gently along the fading currents of the Qing Dynasty. We are now floating through the final rebellions, opium crisis, and the subtle unraveling of imperial authority across China. By the 1910 seconds, most of the empire's major rebellions had ended. The Taiping and Nian rebellions were long past, leaving scars and a quiet exhaustion across provinces. Minor uprisings still simmered, occasionally village disputes, local banditry, and small-scale resistance, but these were not dramatic battles. They were slow, persistent annoyances for officials and ordinary people alike. Imagine a local magistrate receiving news of yet another village revolt. He frowns, writes a report, Puyi, and hopes the next day brings fewer disruptions. And often, the day does not bring fewer disruptions. This is the soft, relentless rhythm of a declining empire. Opium continues to play its subtle, pervasive role. Addiction is widespread but largely normalized. Some smoke recreationally, some smoke to escape life's pressures. Some are quietly ruined by it. Opium dens remain hubs of social interaction, commerce, and quiet despair. Merchants rely on them for trade. Farmers occasionally depend on them for income. Officials may observe or even partake. The result is a society slowly, gently reshaped by the drug, without the need for dramatic confrontation. Meanwhile, merchants quietly adapt to the changing world. Foreign influence is persistent. Ports are open. Treaties enforce trade and territorial concessions. Merchants learn to navigate bribes, customs, and foreign demands with delicate care. Some thrive. Some fall into debt. Most exist somewhere in between, gently drifting with the currents of history. And life continues, always quietly, always slowly. Inside the Forbidden City, life has become a museum of ritual. The young Puyi, the last emperor, is largely ceremonial. Concubines manage household routines. Eunuchs maintain long-standing traditions. Tea is poured at precise times. Silk robes remain immaculate. Reports are written, but authority is largely symbolic. It is a quiet, almost surreal contrast to the world outside. The abdication of 1912 seals the dynasty's fate. No dramatic battle, no heroic last stand, just paperwork, ceremonial formalities, and the soft acknowledgement that centuries of imperial authority have quietly ended. The empire's cultural legacy persists: poetry, rituals, artistry, but political power is gone. Life outside the palace adjusts slowly but inevitably. Families rebuild, merchants adapt, villages recover. The Qing Dynasty, for all its elegance and sophistication, has become history. And yet, the echoes of its slow decline linger. Opium continues to influence society. Bureaucratic habits and paperwork remain in some forms. Cultural traditions persist quietly. Ordinary people carry the subtle marks of decades of rebellion, addiction, and administrative neglect. This is history at its most hypnotic. Not loud, not dramatic, not cinematic, just persistent, gentle, inevitable. Take a slow breath. Feel your body sink deeper into the mattress. Imagine provinces slowly recovering, merchants counting coins, families rebuilding, and the last emperor asleep in a vast, silent palace. The empire has ended. Life continues. History drifts quietly, softly, inexorably. All right, settle even deeper into your blankets. Maybe close your eyes slightly and let your mind drift gently along rivers, villages, and the quiet corridors of provincial offices. We are now exploring life in China after the Qing Dynasty's abdication, how ordinary people, minor officials, and merchants quietly adjusted to the slow but inevitable changes. In provincial towns, life shifted gradually. Former Qing officials still wore the habits of bureaucracy, even when their authority had softened. Ledgers were maintained, reports filed, and ceremonial duties observed. But the real power rested with local leaders, emerging warlords, or cooperative foreign merchants. Villages adapted slowly. Taxes were still collected, fields were still tilled. Families still endured hardships caused by decades of opium addiction, rebellion, and mismanagement. A quiet resilience emerges here. People learn to live with uncertainty, finding rhythm and routine in a world that no longer guarantees protection from higher authorities. Merchants navigated this soft new reality with a careful blend of ingenuity and patience. Some shifted their trade towards safer commodities. Some continued working within opium networks, quietly maximizing profits while avoiding legal attention. Foreign merchants, increasingly confident in their footholds, quietly dictated terms of trade. And through it all, calculations continued. Costs, silver, debt, bribes, survival. Imagine a small-time merchant in Guangzhou. He inspects his opium barrels, counts coins from previous sales, writes a letter to a distant buyer, pours a small cup of tea, and softly waits for the next shipment. Life is calm, repetitive, and quietly stressful. The drama has faded. The risk remains subtle but persistent. Opium don't remain key at social centers. They're neither glamorous nor shocking. People smoke, talk, and sometimes sleep. Some escape, some collapse into quiet addiction. Debt and trade quietly continue within the haze. Even foreign traders occasionally observe these dens with polite curiosity, noting the social patterns without intervention. The empire may be gone, but human behavior, gentle habits, and persistent vices remain. Cultural life carries on softly. Poetry is still composed, tea ceremonies observed, and Confucian rituals practiced in private homes or shrines. Education continues, though sometimes disrupted by political uncertainty or economic pressure. Artisans continue weaving silk, carving wood, and painting scrolls. Even in decline, the aesthetic, ritual, and cultural rhythms of centuries linger quietly. Let's drift over the personal side. Families quietly navigate changing allegiances. Former officials adapt to diminished authority. Young people grow up without imperial authority dictating every detail. Merchants and villagers find their own equilibrium, learning resilience and patience. The rhythm is gentle, repetitive, and slightly ironic. Centuries of imperial oversight have ended, and yet human life persists, quietly and stubbornly. Take a long, slow breath. Exhale. Feel yourself drifting along with these provincial towns, opium dens, and merchant workshops. History here is quiet, not battles, not heroism, not sudden triumphs, just persistence, adaptation, and the gentle ripple of centuries of decisions, mistakes, and habit. And now, as the final layers of this story settle, notice how time moves softly but unceasingly. Ordinary lives continue, families endure, villages grow, markets hum, children play, while the grand sweep of empire has dissolved. The last emperor sleeps in silence, silk robes folded, teacups cooling, poetry unfinished. The past has quietly become memory. Life persists. Human resilience threads through every street, every workshop, every household. The empire is gone, but its echoes remain in routine, habit, and culture, shaping the world subtly and quietly. Take a final, deep breath. Exhale. Let your body sink fully. Close your eyes. Drift gently into sleep, carrying with you the soft persistence of life. After centuries of imperial grandeur, the quiet rhythm of ordinary people, and the gentle inevitability of history itself.